At 52, I suffered a massive stroke. The trip's already paid for, love. You just focus on getting better, my husband said gently, zipping up the last suitcase. They flew out, the whole family, leaving me behind. From my hospital bed, I stared at the ceiling for a long time before calling my notary. When they returned, tanned and smiling from their vacation, something unexpected was waiting. Morning sunlight spilled through the sheer curtains of the gleaming kitchen in their elegant Charlotte home. Marina Ellis, known as Mari to her friends, stood at the counter preparing breakfast with her usual quiet precision. She sliced sharp cheddar for the creamy grits, occasionally glancing at the financial summaries glowing on her tablet. A few silver strands shimmered through her dark hair, neatly tied back in a low bun that spoke of her discipline. At 52, Marina looked strong, composed, and refined, the result of years as one of the city's top financial consultants. The sound of running water echoed from the master bathroom. Her husband, Calvin, was finally awake. Marina exhaled, setting the third cup of coffee on the counter. Their daughter, Lena, was already perched at the marble island, absorbed in her phone. "Mom, can you spot me 1,500 till next week? My agency's late with the commission again, and my fitness studio fees due," Lena said, barely looking up. "Sure," Marina murmured automatically, opening her banking app. The habit was so ingrained now it barely felt like generosity. She transferred the money, then returned to the skillet, whisking the eggs with steady precision. Calvin appeared in the doorway wearing an old robe, his hair damp, his eyes weary. 28 years of marriage had turned him from a passionate historian into a tired community college lecturer, quietly living in his wife's shadow. "Morning," he muttered, taking his seat as the scent of coffee filled the air. That night, the house was silent. "Remember why we fell in love?" Marina whispered to herself, echoing an old promise that no longer felt real. A note on the counter read, "Went to an alumni gathering. Back late." The chicken in the sink was still frozen. The plants had wilted. The recycling overflowed. Marina sighed and moved through her chores on autopilot, watering, sorting, heating up old soup. By 9:30, she sat at her laptop, the glow of spreadsheets lighting her tired face. If she tightened expenses, took 2 extra consulting projects, and postponed the bathroom renovation, they could afford the Maldives by May. It would mean 4 months of non-stop work, 7 days a week, dawn to night. But the image of her family smiling by the ocean made her fingers move faster. And so her grind began. Up at 5 a.m. to clean before work. Home at 9 p.m. to finish reports. Weekends lost to client calls. The calls from her family were short, practical. "Mom, where are the winter coats? Mari, I can't find a clean shirt. Mom, can you send $50 for an Uber?" She always said yes. By February, everything was ready, the flights, the resort, the insurance, even the airport transfers. Marina booked the largest overwater villa. 2 bedrooms, a private plunge pool, an ocean view that stretched to forever. When it was done, she gathered the family. "I have a surprise for you," she said, trying to hide her excitement. Lena and Akira looked puzzled. Calvin looked tired. "In May," Marina said with a smile. "We're all flying to the Maldives. 2 weeks, everything's paid for." For a moment, the air shimmered with joy. Lena squealed and hugged her mother. Akira's disbelief turned to excitement as he looked up photos of the resort. Even Calvin smiled, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. "That's incredible," he murmured. "Are you sure we can afford this?" "I ran the numbers," Marina said proudly. "We can." For the first time in years, they felt like a family again. The next 2 months passed in a blur. Lena shopped for swimsuits and asked her mother's opinion on each one. Akira researched diving tours and local food spots. Calvin watched videos of tropical islands, trying to imagine himself there. And Marina worked harder than ever. Late nights, demanding clients, endless exhaustion. Driven by one dream, her family happy, together, by the sea. A week before the trip, Lena entered the kitchen, twisting her phone nervously. "Mom," she began, "can I bring Jordan? He'll pay for his own ticket, He just needs a spot in our villa.
Marina froze.
Lena, this is a family vacation. The villa only sleeps 4. But we've been together 6 months, Mom. He's basically family. Marina's jaw tightened. No, she said evenly. And that's final. Then the stroke came. One moment she was reaching for her phone, and the next the world tilted and fell apart. When she woke in the hospital, her body refused to move. Only her eyes obeyed. Calvin sat beside her, his face pale but calm. "What are you saying?" she managed to whisper, her voice brittle. "The tickets are already paid for, sweetheart," he said softly. "You just focus on getting better." He tried to smile, but guilt flickered behind it. "The kids and I will go ahead, just as planned. You need rest, treatment. It'd be wasteful to lose all that money." The machines hummed around her, cold and steady. She stared at him, trying to understand how the man she built a life with could say those words. "Who will stay with me?" she finally asked, her voice barely audible. "We arranged everything," Akira said quickly. "Miss Ruby next door will check in, and you have nurses here. You're in good hands, Mom." "Miss Ruby?" she whispered. "She's 75. Calvin placed the folder on the bedside table, the same one she had printed with her name on every booking. "Everything's settled," he said quietly. Marina's lips trembled. Her breath hitched in her throat. She wanted to scream, but her body betrayed her. She turned her face toward the window, where the winter sky stretched pale and endless. "Go, then," she whispered. Calvin didn't answer. He only stood there for a moment, then turned away. The door closed softly behind him, and Marina was left with the sound of her own heart monitor. Steady, unbroken, and cold. The next morning, pale sunlight filtered through the blinds of Marina's hospital room. Machines hummed softly beside her, measuring each slow, deliberate breath. A man in a dark gray suit stood at the foot of her bed, flipping through a folder with deliberate care. His nameplate read Josiah Green, Notary Public. He studied the papers, his brow creasing. "Indeed," he murmured. "A general power of attorney with extended privileges, granting the right to dispose of all your personal and real property, bank accounts, and securities." He glanced up, his tone sharpening. "Who prepared this document?" Marina's voice came weak but clear. "My husband." Josiah sighed, tapping the folder. "I thought as much. Fortunately, it's poorly executed. There's no witness notary, which already renders it questionable. And it lacks the precise scope of authority required by law. Sloppy work, Mrs. Ellis. Sloppy enough to undo." He reached into his leather briefcase, retrieving fresh documents. "We'll revoke this authorization immediately and issue notices to your banks. All transactions will be frozen until we're certain everything's secure." At that moment, the door opened softly. Nurse Imani Jones entered, balancing a tray with 2 cups of tea and a plate of crackers. "I figured you could use a little strength," she said with a kind smile, setting the tray on the rolling table. "How's it going in here?" Josiah gave her a polite nod. "We're in the process of restoring justice, Nurse Jones." He turned back to Marina. "Now, Mrs. Ellis, I'll need details, which banks, which accounts, any property outside your primary residence, safety deposit boxes." For the next hour, Marina answered, slow, careful, deliberate. When a name or number became too hard to pronounce, Nurse Imani gently stepped in, helping her articulate each syllable. Josiah filled out form after form, his pen scratching steadily across the pages. By the end of the session, the folder on the table no longer represented betrayal. It was transformation, her weapon, her protection. Marina leaned back, exhaustion washing over her, but her eyes were steady. For the first time since the stroke, she felt the faint hum of power returning to her chest. Justice had begun. The days that followed became a rhythm of recovery and resolve. Each morning, Marina practiced speaking aloud, recording herself on her phone to measure her progress. Her speech was slow, uneven at first, but she refused to give up. Each word came stronger, each phrase more confident. Josiah visited regularly, bringing with him new documents and patient encouragement. Together, they rebuilt her legal foundation from the ground up, transferring her finances to a new bank, changing passwords, and revoking every form of shared access Calvin once held. With every signature, she reclaimed a piece of herself. When the last account was secured, Josiah opened a fresh folder. "Now," he said, "about the division of property." Marina studied him silently. "Proceed." He hesitated, pen in hand. "Are you sure about the divorce? Perhaps it's better to wait until your full recovery." Marina met his eyes, her tone calm and unwavering.
No.
There was no tremor in her voice now, only certainty. "It's exactly because I'm weak that I need to protect myself," she said. Waiting would only give him more time to act. Josiah regarded her for a moment, then nodded with quiet respect. A sensible decision. Nurse Amani entered just then, smiling as she checked Marina's vitals. "You're getting stronger every day," she said. Marina managed a faint smile. "Not just stronger," she murmured. "Smarter." Outside, the winter light gleamed on the window pane, cool and steady. With every signed form, every recorded word, and every regained movement, Marina Ellis was no longer the woman who once sacrificed everything for others. She was becoming something far more dangerous, a woman who had learned to survive, and who would never again be underestimated. The afternoon light streamed through the wide hospital window, soft and forgiving. Marina stood by the small table near the window, her movements steady now, deliberate, no longer weak. Across from her sat Akira, shoulders hunched, eyes red with frustration. "You know," she began quietly, "I've realized something important during all this, the realization that I was only harming you with my excessive care." He looked up sharply. "Harming me?" Marina's expression softened, but her gaze was unwavering. "Yes, look at yourself, Akira. You're 26 years old, and you still haven't learned to stand on your own 2 feet. His lips trembled. "That's cruel." "It's the truth," Marina said gently, her tone calm but resolute. "And you can be angry, you can be hurt, but deep down, you know I'm right." She walked toward him, her steps slow but sure, and rested her hand on his shoulder, a gesture both loving and firm. "I can help you find a job," she said. "I still have connections in the legal field. I can recommend you for interviews. But there will be no more money, Akira." He stared at her in disbelief. "You're serious? You won't even lend me money until I find a job?" Marina shook her head.
No.
"Because I know that the moment you have my money, your motivation to work will disappear again." Akira stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor. "You've changed, Mom. You've become cold, heartless." Marina's face softened, but her eyes remained clear.
No, son.
"For the first time in years, I've become myself. And the strangest part is that none of you noticed before. I wasn't a person to you. I was a function, a resource, a solution to every problem you didn't want to face." Her words hung in the air, quiet, firm, and undeniable. Akira opened his mouth to reply, then closed it again. His face twisted with something between anger and shame. He turned away, muttering, "You'll regret this," before slamming the door behind him. The echo faded, leaving only silence. But for the first time in a long time, Marina didn't crumble. She didn't cry. She didn't replay the argument in her head. Instead, she took a slow breath and exhaled, a deep, steady release of years of guilt. There was no pain this time, only calm. She turned back to the table, gathering her papers, her lists, her plans. She still had important work to do, work that gave her strength, that gave her meaning. Right on time, Nurse Amani arrived, her presence warm and reassuring as ever. "Everything all right?" Amani asked, setting down a folder and smiling softly. Marina nodded. "Everything's finally starting to be." Later that evening, the quiet of the city stretched outside the rehabilitation center. "Chance?" Calvin said quietly, searching her face. "Not a chance," Marina corrected him with a faint smile. "An opportunity for both of us." He nodded, uncertain, then turned toward the door. "I'll call in a few days," he said and left. Moments later, Nurse Imani poked her head into the office. "Everything all right?" "More than all right," Marina replied. "It seems today is a day for reconciliation and new beginnings." They left the center together and stepped into the warm summer evening. The city pulsed with life around them. People hurrying home, cars threading through traffic, the soft hum of conversation rising from open cafes. Streetlights shimmered against glass towers, and the air smelled faintly of rain and lilacs. But for Marina, everything looked different now. Brighter, richer, alive. "You know what I'm thinking?" she said as they walked along a quiet park path. Imani smiled. "What's that?" "That sometimes you have to lose what you have to find what you truly need." Imani nodded thoughtfully. "Like that old saying, when one door closes, another opens." "Exactly," Marina said. "When the door to my old life closed, I thought it was the end. It turned out to be just the beginning." That night, Marina sat on the balcony of her new condo, a cup of tea warming her hands. The city stretched before her, vast, glittering, full of possibilities. She thought about the strange irony of fate. She had lost her health. She had lost her family in the traditional sense. Yet somehow, she had gained something far greater: self-respect, purpose, and the understanding that life doesn't end at 52. Even after a stroke, it could still be full, beautiful, and wholly her own. Every day, Marina worked with other stroke patients, guiding them through recovery with the same patience that once saved her. Often, she would smile and say, "Sometimes you have to lose what you have to find what you truly need." And slowly, she would watch the despair in their eyes fade, replaced by a small, flickering light of hope. What began as tragedy had become transformation. The illness, the betrayal, the pain, all of it had forged something unbreakable within her. For Marina Ellis, it was not an ending. It was the beginning of a new, more conscious, more authentic life. One that made room for difficulty and sorrow, but also for discovery, laughter, and love. Most of all, a deep and unwavering love for herself.